Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull back the curtain and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, questions, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency. Fun one today, we've got a guest, a friend of the pod, if you will. Joining us today is Tommy Walker, founder of the Content Studio. We also both worked at CXL back in the day, though sequentially, not together, and we'll bring that up a couple times in this chat. Okay, so the topic we covered today was, what should a content marketer be gold on? We're talking KPIs, metrics, numbers. If you're a business or a marketing leader, how do you incentivize your content marketing team through performance goals? Organic traffic, social shares, revenue from content. There are a million ways you can cut this cake. So listen in for our thoughts in today's Kitchen Side episode of the Long Game Podcast.
Oh yeah.
Oh shit, we are.
Welcome to another episode of Kitchen Side, where we take you behind the scenes of our agency to show you how the sausage is made. This is actually the first time we've had an outside guest on the Kitchen Side series. So welcome, Tommy Walker. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Tommy has seen many kitchens.
Indeed.
Tommy is the founder at Content Studio. And today we're talking about, what should a content marketer be gold on? This is a really huge topic. So where should we start?
Are you asking me right now?
Yes. I mean, I found an article on DataBox, and there's a list of things that we could goal a content marketer on, everything from revenue to lead gen, SEO keywords. How do you guys feel about all of that?
I could bring up how I came up with the idea for this topic in the first place, and maybe that positions us with the conversation and the context.
Let's do that.
So I was on a forum on like a Slack group or something, and I saw like a thread of somebody really ranting and complaining about this business that they worked for, because they were a content marketer and they were being gold essentially on leads attributed to content. And that was antithetical towards like customer focused approach. They didn't like the fact that they only had to be gold on kind of like revenue and lead goals. That was too, I guess, like business focused. And it didn't encapsulate the whole value of a content marketing program. That was the gist of it. But I saw that and I thought like, all right, I kind of get that. Like, there's clearly more value from the content marketing perspective, but from the business leader perspective, it makes perfect sense to goal on something like that. So I guess like I found myself taking the opposite side of that person's rant to a certain extent. But then I started thinking, well, what would be a more holistic goal for a content marketer that kind of incentivizes both sides for the long term?
So I'm going to jump in for a second here. I'm going to tell you about a piece of software that I'm developing right now with a data scientist, because the whole goals thing is ridiculous, right? What do you goal on is always going to be contextual to the business first and foremost. But then second most is that, what do you have attribution, like what's your attribution modeling available to you? And the reality is like most people don't have solid attribution modeling. I've worked with, Fortune 100 enterprises, and even that, the attribution modeling for content marketing specifically is so difficult to do, because we're looking at a very transactional thing in a lot of cases, right? Your data scientists are like, do you get a lead? Good. Yes. No. Not like, does this lead have a return visit? How many times have they visited? When was the last time that they visited? How many times have they visited since the last time that they visit? Like all of these things, I have to like tell leaders all the time, like when was the last time you read a blog post and then immediately signed up for a thing? It never happens. You've never done it. I guarantee you've never done it, because nobody does. It's not human behavior.
I think I wouldn't maybe purchase a product right away. Maybe I would if it was an impulsive type e-commerce blog. But I would sign up for an email list if I was very impressed by the content and the style. I would sign up for maybe an ebook or a webinar or something like that. But I'm not usually going to go purchase or like sign up for a demo for an enterprise product or something like that. Certainly not.
But I mean, even on the first visit, Alex,
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends how high intent the blog post is, right? If I'm searching for best business automation software and I land on a Zapier blog post and they have themselves positioned as the first place on the listicle, and I can sign up for a free trial, I'm actually pretty likely to sign up for that because I'm in the mindset of searching for business automation software. But if I'm searching for, like what is the keto diet? Like I'm probably not going to go out and buy like a keto subscription box. Like I'm still kind of in the research phase. So I think that's where it comes to like intent mapping and the whole customer journey approach to content marketing. So, I mean, it's a big old depends, but for the most part, definitely not going to buy something right away.
Yeah. If I were to step out of like talking about intent or like top of the funnel or anything like that, and just talk about how I engage on those websites, it's someone shares an article with me, like, oh, this is a good article, close out of it. A couple of days later, someone shares another article, or like I see a tweet that's from the same website. I'm like, oh, they popped up again. That's interesting. Let me look at who the author is. Oh, they have other articles. And maybe after a couple articles, then I'll think, okay, I want more of this content because it seems good for my edification.
Is that subconscious, or I would say it's more subconscious?
Definitely subconscious. This is not calculated. It's like I read it. I rarely read articles now because I just don't prioritize making time for it. But when I read a good one, my instinctive behavior is I want to make sure I get more stuff from this place. Not necessarily that I want to use their product or anything like that. It might cross my mind. I might look at their website, but I'm not going to sign up. Probably it's not even a product for me to use anyway.
But the thing that's interesting is that two things, and you both kind of said different things, right? Alex, you said, if I'm searching for it. And David, you said, if it's being shared with me, right? And what's interesting is you've got two completely different modes of discovery there, right? So if you're searching for it, Alex, that's one thing. And you've got this whole SEO, like you can start going down that rabbit hole of what are you gold on the SEO side of things. And then David, you're talking about if you get it shared with me, that's a whole different set of goals. And it's a whole different set of ways that you create content to be shared, right? Your whole intention behind that. So like, how do you do that? Now, like, here's something that I'm working on with the data scientist, right? We're actually in the process. He's created an algorithm that takes up all of these different metrics that we have: return visitors, scroll depth, lead generation, revenue generated, all of that. And it's thrown into this like fancy algorithm, does a bunch of fancy math, and then spits out a single number. Because with that, it gives you an idea of like, what's the index of your site and what are your actual most valuable pages? Because the one that generates the most leads might not be the most valuable because the lead quality might be garbage, right? And the one that generates the most sales, you might have a completely skewed perspective on that. So like, but if we can start to look at a number of different metrics, then we can like create a true value of a page.
But that's a per page basis, not necessarily a program basis.
Well, yeah, I mean, this particular product, it would be on a per page basis, but it's those pages are calculated with a number of different metrics in mind, right? So like, and if we can see what's over indexing or under indexing on those pages, we can start to drill into why that might be, right? Why is this page that's over indexing? Maybe it doesn't generate the most leads, but it does generate a lot of return visitors, which then turns into XYZ things, and you can start to go down that path.
So to reverse engineer that, like, it sounds like the metrics are actually, as they're kind of acting as inputs to this composite diagnostic score for a single blog post. So you mentioned return visitors, revenue, leads, etc. Those are the things that I think maybe would be gold for content marketers. Like those would be the types of things where it's like, hey, at the beginning of each quarter, we're going to set this goal, this target based on the revenue attributed to blog posts, the traffic that you bring in per blog post, or like total programmatically, or return visitors. Is there one that's more important than others? Or is that completely context dependent? I think those are the things where it's like how the business leader or the marketing leader positions these goals. So I guess the content marketer has something to aim for over the quarter, not just on a per blog post basis.
Yeah, I mean, my true north metric is always return visitors, because I work mostly in B2B SaaS. So like return visitors is my true north metric, because without return visitors, you're never going to get into that consideration set, right? And if you're doing your job well, then those return visitors can, turn into other stuff, because again, nobody's going to buy stuff on the first blog post. and maybe they have like little micro conversions. Like David, to go back with what you were saying just a second ago, and like first, I want to hear what you're like. I'm talking a lot. We're
No,
like,
that's okay.
yeah.
I have a question when you're done.
Yeah. So we have these like little micro transactions too that are going on. So like David, in order for them to, in order for their social media feeds to show up in your stuff, you have to then make that decision to follow. So how many times do you have to be exposed to their stuff before you make the decision to follow, and then to make that decision to become a lead, right? Like, I don't even know if I'm even saying anything at this point. I'm delirious, but yeah, I mean, the idea is like, the return visitor is always my true north metric, and then from that try to build out like the rest of the program on what do we do after somebody returns, because I always make the assumption that nobody's going to do anything on the first visit. So,
and a return visitor is a quality lead too, right? Because versus somebody who's just coming, stopping by and they never come back again. So could that be another metric that you goal a content marketer on, is qualified traffic or quality traffic?
Yeah, I mean,
it feels like a lot of this, I mean, based on that algorithm the data scientist is building, like it sounds like revenue is one of the core things. Like all those inputs go into like, hey, lots of leads but low quality, which equals this much revenue, like therefore this score. I wonder if, I mean, I'm of the belief that revenue should be the end goal, and there are probably a lot of inputs and a lot of revenue is like the lagging metric. Like you're not going to see returns for like months, but you can at least see, are we getting more return visitors? Are we getting leads? What are the quality of those leads that might close in, I don't know, 3, 6, maybe 9 or 12 months? And then I don't know what the case would look like, but measuring each of those at least inputs regularly, and then at the end of the year, be able to look at the lagging metric of revenue and then see how much content drove of that. Granted, that assumes you have all the attribution set up and it's clean.
Right. That's important.
Yeah.
Well, from an agency perspective, it's like people are going to continue to hire us and work with us because of the revenue we generate from the program. And that's always going to be an important metric. And that's why we set up the dashboards early on so we can track that stuff. But if you're goaling the individual content marketer or writer on that, there's almost no way they can decipher that early on or like in the midst of their content program, which David, that's why we, during our content marketing engagements with clients, we map backwards from that. And that's like the lagging indicator. So we're always pushing for revenue, which keeps us honest with regards to which keywords we read about, how we're converting people from those posts, including top of funnel, right? Like we try to track that back as well. But then we track backwards from that macro lagging metric goal and say, all right, we're for the most part, our strategies are search driven, and the return visitors I want to talk about in a second, because that actually may work much better for this thought leadership package that we're developing. But for search driven content, it's like organic traffic. We have to just like, it's the easiest thing to track. And as long as we're honest about being relevant with our keywords, not pulling a HubSpot and basically writing about how to make a shrug emoji or, the most motivational quotes. We don't, typically our clients don't have the time and budget to waste their time and money on keywords like that. But organic traffic is going to be, I think, the best mid-level metric for us as we track the program. And then earlier on, if it's search driven, we'll typically track like rankings even, just to say like, all right, the tip of the iceberg is shining through. But that's all in the context of a search driven content marketing program. I think return visitors is kind of more interesting, because it encompasses more than just one channel.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason I look at that is like you can optimize when you're focusing solely on let me take a step back here. There are certain metrics that are easy to goal, right? Let's get a lot of traffic from these particular key phrases. Easy, clean, super simple, not indicative of what actually becomes a customer.
Vanity.
Right? Like, right. I mean, that's the school of thought that I come from, is like, traffic is a vanity metric. I'm that guy. I fall in that camp, and it's terrible. And I probably am not popular for that reason. But no, I mean, the return visitor is like, okay, we've got this. If you're going specifically and almost exclusively off of search traffic, then you have to cast a much wider net. And you might have a bunch of one-time only visitors. And then what? right? If you're spending, $500 on a blog post, which I've frequently done, or $1,500 on a blog post, and I've gone that as high as that. If somebody visits once, or if the majority of the people visit once and they don't turn into anything, then how much money did I actually waste on that one specific piece, right?
Yeah.
And then David,
I think it's like we mentioned in the beginning, but I think there's two inputs to deciding what the goals are. It's what's the business goal? Like maybe the business wants to drive more revenue pipeline for sales. And so the goal should be like lead generation and pipeline. And like maybe the strategy is an account-based marketing strategy. So you're not trying to get millions of views. You just care about getting views from the right people. So then views don't matter. It's just quality of leads and pipeline. So like there's a question that Chris had posed in the prep notes of like, should the CEO be defining the goals for content marketing? No, I think the CEO should be defining business goals. Right. I think it comes down to the marketing leader to then decide how does content then feed into that, and what's the strategy, and based on the strategy and the business goals, what should we be measuring, versus like we should not be just blindly measuring traffic as a goal, unless if you're like a media company selling ads or something.
And that's if your marketing leader understands content marketing as a subset.
Exactly.
Right. And that's a big challenge. I've worked with plenty of people who they're marketing directors or whatever, and what their whole approach is like it's product marketing. And every blog post needs to be a product marketing blog post, right? Where it's like, let's talk about features. And it's like, no, that's not, all the research shows that that's not the way to go, right? Any of the research, take a look at anything that Andy Crestodoni is doing. Look at the Orbit Media stuff, like anything shows you that when you're focused on product, that's not going to happen. But your traditional, MBA marketers, it's a completely different skill set, right? It's always still money in, money out, right? How much should we spend on this programmatic TV ad, and how much did it, generate in terms of revenue? When I think about goals, right? And again, this doesn't make me very popular, but when I think about goals, I measure on, I think when I write or when I edit, I think about one of four goals, and one of four goals only. And one is this getting shared? Is this generating discussion? So 1 and 2. Is this generating leads, or is this generating sales? And having one of those intentions in mind is what drives like the whole energy that goes into the piece, right? Yeah. And if we're doing things like the keyword research and we're trying to get that discoverability up there, cool, and that will happen, right, as a byproduct of that. But if I can have somebody discover over search because I've intentionally done that, but then the infusion, the energy that I'm trying to put into it is to be shared, and then people are sharing it, then we have that organic discovery that's going along there. And that's nothing in the list of, that's nothing in the traditional list of goals.
You don't see the shares too often. I wonder why.
Well, those are kind of at diametric ends of the spectrum here. And I think you actually have a trade-off with some of this stuff. Like if you're doing, Ryan Law just did a Twitter thread, and I mostly agree with it. Essentially, like this content distribution idea, we're placing every blog post through the same pipeline of content distribution. But his point is that if it's search driven, it's inherently less shareable, and vice versa. So it really does track back to what your goals are with the program, which I also think gameability wise, like I think return visitors is so not gameable. And it also kind of associates to both of those channels, which is why I like it a lot. Can I back up and do like a high level framework for how I think about goal setting in general, not just for content, but for experimentation programs, for sales, all that stuff?
No, we don't.
No. All right, I'll shut up.
Before you do that, there's actually research. I think it was Brian Dean. I think it was Backlinko, but it was definitely a thing done with, and it's a few years old now though, but with BuzzSumo, and it shows exactly what you're talking about, is that the search does not correlate with social.
Mm-hmm.
There's no correlation between the two.
Well, it's like just obviously thinking through it. It's stuff that you're writing for search that has the most traffic is like, what is SEO? And if I imagine what I would share on Twitter, it's not usually going to be what is SEO. It's going to be about some contrarian opinion,
Right.
some SEO is dead type piece, which comes up every year. That's a different tangent. But so goal setting in my mind, like it's the hardest thing to do, and it's the most important thing to do in many ways. It's also unimportant, but I'll come to that later about specific goals. But in terms of goals, like I try to think about what's the trade-off to a specific goal. Like there's always going to be a trade-off. Like for example, with conversion rate, if you're a conversion rate optimization specialist, most often people are going to say, all right, we're going to increase the conversion rate month over month or quarter after quarter. Well, the trade-off there is, it's a very specific, attainable, measurable thing. But you're also like, if you increase your traffic, if you add more volume to the ads you're spending, and you lower the conversion rate, but you're increasing your lead count and it's still economically viable, well, it's not a bad thing that your conversion rate lowered, right? You're just like raising the umbrella. And then there's gameability. Like how gameable is this metric? And something like, let's say, first-time visitors, like overall traffic, crazy gameable, right? You could pour a bunch of paid ads into your content, even if it hits an irrelevant audience. You could start writing blog posts on motivational quotes that aren't ever going to convert to sales, nor are they going to, build conversation or shares. So it's completely gameable. And then there's, I guess this is still a trade-off, but it's like, what's the split between the utility versus the precision? So how useful a metric is often diametrically opposed to how precise it is and how like actually meaningful it is. So when we talk about revenue from an individual piece of content or programmatically, that's really, really hard to estimate, because it's like, are you going to do, like Tommy said, last click, first click, algorithmic, like at what touch point do you attribute that piece of content, what percentage of revenue? So like often the utility comes from these very easy metrics. So, return visitors is actually an easy utility based one, but it's actually less gameable, which is, why I keep coming back to that, is actually a pretty damn good metric depending on your program goals. Does that framework, do those three things kind of resonate, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so.
So that was gameability, utility versus accuracy, and what was the third one?
Yeah, utility versus precision more so, and then just trade-offs as a whole, right? Like there's always going to be a trade-off. I guess that's kind of related to gameability too, but no matter what metric, if you pick organic traffic as your goal, you're inherently trading off social share, viral content, and backlink building content.
Do you have to be though?
Well, if the team is gold on that and their performance is or bonus is based on that, like they're going to neglect any sort of contrarian, like they're going to basically write only keyword driven stuff. And even to the extent, like they would actually neglect, and I've seen this by the way at HubSpot, if you're gold on only organic traffic, you're going to pick the highest keyword search volume and not the highest intent terms. Exactly. So you're actually going to trade off business value for that.
I'm gonna point to one person and one person only who I think does that balance extremely well. And that's really what it comes down to me, is like, you can have the high volume, like you can go after the high volume stuff, but then also encourage the return visitors and the social shares. But it comes down to how you've created the content. It always comes down to the content itself. And as a content marketer, as a writer, like it's very easy to just write for robots or just write for people, right? And it doesn't have to be one or the other. The only person I know who does this extremely well is Aaron Orendorff. Like, he's the only person I know who does this extremely well, where he's writing stuff that's completely like, it's search optimized, but it's compelling as hell. Like, and that I think is like, there doesn't have to be a trade-off. There often is.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that reminds me of kind of what Allie, our head of content, has talked about. She calls it like the SEO sandwich, right? Like there's the initial keyword research, just to know that, hey, there's some search opportunity here. But when you're writing an article, you're not looking up other articles to like copy and just make a little bit better. Like there's no skyscraper technique. It's literally, if you're writing about this topic, you're writing about it because you have a unique point of view that you have a lot of conviction behind.
Yep.
And then after writing it, then at the end, it's like a little sprinkle of making sure it's like optimized then. I like that approach. My personal belief is that's how all content should be written versus just copycat content, but easier said than done and takes more time and energy to do because you're not just copying people.
Yeah. Well, it's John Bonini. I'm going to reference two different people here. John Bonini has this thing that he's been talking about on LinkedIn where he's like, keywords are not your angle.
Yeah, I saw that. That was good.
Keywords aren't even your topic. They're not your angle. They're like, which is really important because what we lack now, and this is, you could start to talk about a whole bunch of different people. I was on Nathan Lacka's podcast not too long ago, and he said, I'm having a hard time getting authors to inject their own perspective into these things. Like, we're almost afraid because we've been used to the skyscraper technique as a whole field of people, right? We've been so used to the skyscraper technique that we forget to have a point of view. And then we start looking at someone like Pep, right, who's talking all about differentiation, right? And Alex, you know this because you were there for it. That's one of the things that he did really well, and one of the things he encouraged really well was to go after these key phrases, but then also have a memorable voice as you're talking about the stuff, which makes it so you're sticking out in their mind, and then you're earning social shares and you're earning those return visits.
Yeah.
When you were at CXL, I didn't look at SEO keywords at all. We did Painpoint SEO, if anything, which is, we had the community and we had like our own conferences, and we would just talk in the office about which topics we were going to write about. And if it ranked, awesome. Did you have keywords? Like, did you do SEO when you were there, or?
No, I'm the worst. I'm the, like, I get asked to go on, like, people are asking me like, hey, let's talk about SEO. And I'm like, no, I'm actually the worst person in the world to talk about that. But what Pep and I would do is discuss, it's Painpoint SEO, right? Which is, I think, way more valuable.
I do too.
Right.
For audience building, at least, for sure.
Yeah.
And for sales enablement.
Can you explain more about Painpoint SEO for those who may not understand?
Sure. So, one of my favorite pieces that I ever wrote there was why simple websites are better, right? This is one that is a curious question that comes up quite a bit because you hear it from other people, right? Simple websites are better. Simple websites are better. And that's one of those ones where it's like, oh, okay, let's talk about this. And I remembered that one very specifically because we had a very, like, he's like, I want to have these things included, which is, let's talk about prototypicality. Let's talk about cognitive fluency. Let's talk about other things along those nature. And then I'm going, okay, well, I'm going to throw in things like typography and visual information processing theory and really get into the science of why simple websites are better on the off chance that somebody's going to be searching for this particular thing, right? Painpoint SEO, like our another one. I think this was a really popular one. And Alex, you can talk about your favorite ones too, because I know you've did it as well. Another one was like, why am I, or, abandoned cart rates, or like how to reduce your abandoned cart rate. That's one that it's just a question that people have, right? It's not one where we're necessarily going, okay, and I never looked at key phrases beyond like, I wasn't getting into LSIs and all of the, like, all the other I just didn't have time. I wanted to do the research. I'm not even an outliner.
I don't outline my posts either. So Painpoint SEO, we're almost doing Painpoint SEO by these podcasts. This is almost how we do things, except we almost removed the SEO element from it. But it came from a community, a forum. I saw somebody asking a question. When we're working through troubles, challenges with our clients, often issues come up and we're like, let's talk about this one. It's clearly an issue people are having. So instead of coming from an Ahrefs content gap analysis or a SERP analysis, or, people also ask, you're pulling ideas from the actual pain points that your potential customers are having. So I think this is a good example of that. I would often just mine like, CXL forums and Facebook groups and conferences. It would come from conversations. If I would write a blog post, there would often be questions about the blog post. And then, all right, I can write a new blog post based on that. Or like, for example, people would always come up and ask like, how do I run multiple concurrent A/B tests? Or how do I A/B test on a website with low traffic? Well, there's no search volume for those because they're pretty niche questions, but we heard the question 12 times and we're like, there's clearly people who are interested in this. So that's where we came up with those topic ideas. Another question on metrics with Pep. So did you ever have like quarterly goals or, like, so this is,
I've gotten in, I've been so fortunate to get in everywhere that I've ever worked early enough where it wasn't quarterly, like the quarterly goals or anything like that, fortunately. So I imagine that changed over time.
No. So Pep told me when I came in, it was 100,000 monthly traffic or something like that. And he's like, my goal, your goal is to get to 1 million visits a month, which isn't really a goal. It's more of a North Star. Like it's not something that you're going to track towards month over month in like a very concrete way. And in fact, I talked to Ross Hudgens on the podcast yesterday from Siege Media. And I was asking him how he sets goals for clients. And he's like, we don't do 15% month over month. We don't set targets month over month. We give you a map in terms of what we think we can reach because we're doing search-driven content 12 months out. But we say that's something that we're shooting for. It's not a target. We're just trying to go in that direction. And that's maybe a feasible expectation. So I do find, I guess, like if you're a public company or if you're trying to raise the next round, these things map up to the sales organization that maps onto your earnings targets, et cetera. Yep. But I think those very concrete, specific goals are mostly a waste of time. When you do an analysis of like the last 2 years of data, try to project out on a time series, try to predict seasonality and all that stuff. I think saying, all right, we're at 3,000 traffic this month and 3,500 next month, mostly a waste of time.
Right. Well, and when it comes to, talk about goals, like go back to like revenue goals and stuff, some of that stuff is just completely out of your control. You write a really great blog post that drives a lot of traffic, but then your product marketers, there's no fluent or like congruency between the two pages. They go to a transactional page and the product page is garbage.
Yeah. So you don't have control over it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or like your salespeople don't know how to close, or your demand gen person doesn't know how to write a sequence, or at least in a way that there's a concrete story across the board that everybody's telling the same story. Like, like you're going to be the first one to get blamed,
right?
If you're the front line. But there's so many other places that could be looked at. That's why I started focusing on content ops, by the way. Like, because that visibility, not to like segue into that side of things, but like that lack of visibility across the board and between departments means there's very little coordination between the messaging that you're putting out there, which kills everybody, makes you all look bad, and nobody knows where to point the finger.
Right.
Yeah. I think we should definitely have you on for another content ops kitchen side. I love that topic in general. But what do you think about these, like, they're not goals, but you throw out like a big target, like not a target. I don't even know what to call it because it's not like you're measuring yourself towards it. But, like let's 10x traffic. Or Carissa, we've talked about this. I don't even know what our podcast numbers are, but I'm like, how can we 10x it? Like, it's not like we're like looking month over month and saying like, all right, we need to hit 5% growth, like month over incrementally like that. It's like, how can we like really step change this? Because I feel like those things help me out a little bit more as long as there's a specific number attached to it. Because then I can position myself and then start thinking bigger as opposed to like, oh, how can I hit these short-term goals next month?
Well, and David actually gave me a goal and I was like, oh, that's a little high. He's like, well, we like to aim high here. And, let's see how close we can get to it. And I was like, I like that attitude. Let's try that,
I mean, it's why I am constantly a disappointment to myself because I set such high goals and I never hit them.
Thank you for bringing me into it.
I just use them as more like thought exercises. Like I love these mental models of, I think it's Peter Thiel has this thing where it's like, all right, what's your 5-year goal? What would it look like if you accomplished it in 6 months? And it's like, well, I've never thought of it that way. That's probably not feasible. Right. But if I had to do it, like this is how I would do it. And then you suddenly start thinking outside of the box. And I like that mindset as opposed to like, all right, we're going to hit 10% growth next month, 12% the month after that, 11% after that, because that's what the sales team needs. It's like, no. How can we completely skyrocket this thing?
So it's like psychological in a lot of ways too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's about coming up with the mechanics of the entire experience. So I don't necessarily, if you said, hey, let's 10x this thing, my first instinct is not to go, okay, let's do more, keyword driven SEO pieces, because that's just not my wheelhouse. But I might start looking at, okay, well, what can we do to like, what little mechanics can we put into play to like gain more social shares, right? Or what kind of mechanics can we do to, social shares is a good one, right? What kind of what can we do to make this experience, not just words on the page, but what can we do to make this experience something that will help us generate this stuff? Am I necessarily looking at, traffic numbers that come from that? No, because I can always build them, like I want to take the people that are already coming there, get them to return more, and then have them also work on that. A good example of this, right? I did page fights with Unbounce and Conversion XL. And one of the things that I did to make it kind of a differentiated experience is we'd use Unbounce. And then this was back when you could embed Twitter chats onto a page. So we'd use that, we'd embed a Twitter chat there, and then we'd have the Hangout on air right next to that. So the unique experience in that case at the time, it was, people would do webinars and then say you'd have the one webinar platform right here. And then over here, you'd have, hey, join us on this hashtag on Twitter. And you were asking people to like flip between these two things. But from a mechanical standpoint, I was going, well, hey, how do we keep people on this page and drive the conversation so they can see what's going on here? And also get them to, and then we have a landing or an email form underneath that. So how can we kind of create this little closed loop experience right here that can then, have that? And maybe after the thing, we have a contest, right? Or somebody who shares the most. I've done this with my own stuff where it's like, if you share the most and drive the most traffic, right, you get the most referrals for that, and you have the mechanic in place to actually do that, then I'm going to give you free consulting hour, or if I have sponsors, you get a 60-day trial of whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to incentivize people to do the work for me because I'm super lazy in that regard.
Well, I like how you think, Tommy, because you take seemingly 2D concepts and you make them 3D in a sense. Like, everything has this like bigger overarching like storytelling, I guess, like you're holding that. So it's pretty cool.
Like, gets
me in trouble.
How does it get you in trouble?
Yeah.
Oh, just like it goes back to like, if I'm thinking in this broad, way personally, like me personally, and then someone's like, well, no, we just want to generate more leads. How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
That's the conversation that, yeah, exactly. Get your head out of the clouds, kid. That's going to take a whole lot more effort than what we're willing to put in. That's going to take a lot of money. Yes.
That's the filmmaker in you.
But yeah, and you're
really is
something outstanding too, which like I think is rare for a content program. But so the way you just thought about, like you thought through that exercise with page fights and all of the different sharing mechanisms and kind of creative ways to drive more leads and traffic. Mm-hmm. If you put your manager's hat on, how do you incentivize an employee to think like that? Can you even do that through metrics and goals, or is it simply through one-on-ones, more qualitative stuff, like saying like, hey, thought exercise, can't publish new content. What do you do? Like, how do you incentivize employees and like content team members to think like that?
That's a great question. And I've done this. I've scaled this because I've managed employees. And I'm currently working on that with my employee right now. It's about company culture. I think that really starts to come down to the culture thing and what kind of culture are you trying to facilitate within your team? So one of the things that I would do on, say, my content team calls, right? And I don't do this so much anymore, but I would try to make it fun, right? We'd say, okay, we're having our stand up, we're talking to each other right now. But then I say like, okay, let's go into Slack right now. I'm going to give you a stock image and let's create a story about whoever this, whatever this person is, right? Tell me about them. We've got 15 minutes. Let's take that time and create a story around that. And then whoever has the most like little emojis next to their story or whatever, that person gets something, right? Just maybe anything from a pat on the back to a $5 Amazon gift card. And then what that's helping us do is really try to think outside of like now that we know who that person is, what kinds of things would they want to see out of this experience, right? That we're trying to create. It just like, there was an exercise that we did when I was at QuickBooks, and I thought it was great. And Pixar does this too. So if you guys are wanting to look at some of these experiences, Creativity Inc. is a really great book. Mm-hmm. But it's a culture thing where you're going, we're not going to say no, right? If we're brainstorming ideas, we're not going to say no, right? We're gonna just kind of have a free flowing conversation. It's a free space. No one's going to judge you. You throw out all your ideas, no matter how stupid they might sound, like no judgment zone there. Once we have that, right, and we come out of that brainstorm session of whatever it is that we're trying to do, then we can start to whittle it down. But you've got the green area, which is where we all brainstorm together. And then in some places actually have this. You have a green area of a single room. Everybody moves to that part of the room. And it's like you're signaling to yourself, this is creativity area. And then the other side of the room is the red area where we start to talk about the ideas that we've had. Right.
Yeah.
So but with content marketing in particular, it's always like we're afraid, right? I think that's the biggest thing is as a leader, you have to facilitate to reach any goal. You have to facilitate a culture of courage.
Yes.
Right. Like the biggest problem that we see with content marketing and like just in general is that we go back to that point of view thing, that perspective thing. Let's give us your take on whatever it is that we do. But we're so afraid because everybody's looking at this transactionally. I'm afraid to give my opinion because I feel like, maybe you're going to judge me, or maybe I'm going to say the wrong thing. And maybe that means I'm not going to get asked back to be a writer. And maybe that's going to get my agency, not give me the business because I've injected my opinion into this. And one of the things that I'm really happy about early on in my career, working with Pep specifically, is he encouraged that. It was almost a mandate that you have your own unique perspective on this stuff, because without that, he has such a strong voice, and he wanted to have a platform that has this strong voice, and that voice is what made CXL what it is, and that's what's making Winter what it is now too, right? But you have to encourage people to really think about this stuff, and let them be courageous in those ideas. And if you constantly are going, even during a brainstorm session, no, that's not going to work. We can't do that. We don't have the budget. We don't have the blah, 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 blah.
Is the biggest killer of creativity too. So.
Right.
This reminds me of experimentation. And I think it was Joanna Lord who did a talk about how at her organization, I think it was a Porch, they gave it was like a stuffed unicorn or a stuffed animal of some sort. And that got placed on the desk of whoever broke the website the worst via an experiment that month. And, that was to signify that, hey, you tried something, like you took a risk and it didn't work out, but you weren't afraid to step outside and actually, you failed. And I don't think it's about celebrating failure, but I think it's about celebrating risk taking, which to me moves beyond the realm of what people are calling psychological safety now. And it's less about psychological safety kind of safe spaces. And it's more about actually celebrating that kind of innovative thinking. But I don't know where I was going with that. I think it is a cultural thing. I think that's where I was going. Yeah. Because if you just 100%. Incentivize things like win rates for A/B tests, it's well, you're either going to get cherry picked results or very easy, obvious tests. You're not going to get those outside of the box things. If you just celebrate in content, it would be content publication. You're just going to get the easiest articles that people can write, not the most challenging pieces. And same thing with A/B test frequency. You're going to get the easiest tests. So I think you have to have some sort of qualitative, cultural, intangible value that says, hey, we're going to take some big swings now and then too. And if you fail, so be it. It's really about the fact that you stepped up and actually took the risk.
Right. Yeah. If I were to pull this back to the content marketing piece, what I'm hearing is it's not just business goals or marketing strategy. It's also what's the company culture and what's the company brand that you want to create? Because SEO driven content isn't going to be great. It's not going to be great for the brand. Probably not great for the content marketing team's culture either. If that's all they're pumping out, that's kind of soul draining stuff to write, to be honest, if it's purely just for traffic. And it seems like it's one, we agreed it's not the CEO that defines goals, but it's up to the content marketing leader to say to the team, hey, I know we have goals around X, or this is what the business cares about, but we are not going to become soul sucking content farm. This is the type of content we value, which generates maybe it's discussion or generates shares or something because it's interesting to the user base. Versus just looking at revenue and traffic. But I guess where the challenge comes is how do we tie that to business value if that's the goal, which B2B software companies tend to care a lot about.
I do think it's a Weasley answer to say, going back to this first rant that I saw in that forum, I don't like this goal. It doesn't encapsulate everything the content offers. Therefore, like I shouldn't be gold, right? Like you still need some kind of metric to like position yourself towards. So I do think like you have to replace it with something, but all of the context that you just mentioned there, I think is incredibly important. And that's why it's such a complex thing. And you need leadership to be involved and understand this stuff. Can I real quick talk a little shit on that article and that statistic about CEOs?
Wait, really quick, before you go into that, I think it's goals with guardrails and like cultural values that define how you get to those goals.
And room for play and experimentation, I think, to Tommy's point.
Yes.
I'm going to jump in on that too. Sorry, Alex. No, you can't. No. The other thing is like, okay, take the big risk, but also take time to reevaluate. So everything that I do, like as a content marketer, I'm also looking at heat maps. Okay, how much did people scroll down the page to actually do that? Where are the hot spots on here? And can I quantify how much that hit? And then with that quantification, again, some of this might just be in my head, but with that quantification, does this page generate more return visitors? Are people coming back to this page and revisiting these thoughts and concepts? I think about it like movies where it's like, I watched Fight Club. I can't tell you how many times. And the reason is because that has so much substance to it that I want to come back to it. And then thinking about that, taking it a step further is like, does this generate more? Yeah. I mean, you have to have those guardrails. Exactly.
Alex, you wanted to shit on the DataBox article?
Yes. So this is something that it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. So the fact that like they say DataBox found that the CEO sets the content marketing goals for more than 40% of teams, that to me is so obviously like bad statistics or like a bad sample. Like that just shows me that it's like all like 5-person companies who are answering this. And therefore like that statistic is irrelevant to be published. And they're doing it because it's a check the box, it's original research, and maybe other bloggers are going to cite this. So a little rant there. Harissa, can you read the 32 metrics that they said content marketers should track? Because this is fucking ridiculous.
Fuck. Yeah, this is silly.
Revenue, lead generation, lead scoring, brand awareness, user engagement, trust, page scroll depth, target audience, backlinks, SEO keywords, customer brand loyalty, returning visitors, amount of content produced, content deadlines, content cohesiveness, content succinctness, content repository, amount of time distributing content, team efficiency, domain authority, bounce rate, new connections and partnerships, traffic, percent of revenue from organic search, user intent, amount of purchase-driven content, conversions, updating old posts, number of your audience's problems solved, daily social media posts, infographic visibility, team education. It's really
Okay. So I get that they're maybe laying the landscape and like they asked a bunch of marketers to comment on this and just kind of included everything. Yeah. But is it any wonder that people are confused about what marketers should be gold on?
I'm curious who responded to this survey and like listed like target audience as a goal.
Number of your audience's problem solved. Like how do you that's not a goal. I mean, that's
infographic visibility is my favorite.
Yeah. I wonder if I did any of that. Every time I read a blog post is like, did I actually solve somebody's problem here? Or did I just pontificate?
I mean, I'm sure it's like important stuff, right?
It is
content being succinct.
Search this topic, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's just like these are clearly not KPIs that you set at a programmatic level from leadership. Like, could you imagine saying like, "Hey, we're going to goal you on the trust that you generate for our business"?
Well, what I'm concerned about are like the downstream.
There is no trust report in Google Analytics.
Right.
Sorry,
DataBox has quite some authority, I think, at this point. Like, they're probably going to rank for how to set content marketing goals. Some content marketer is going to look at this and be like, "I'm confused."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what this tells me is there's room for education, maybe like better education around this, and that folks don't know how to set goals.
Switching careers.
I do think that speaks to Tommy, to your point on maybe like you've talked about this in several tweets and different podcasts, but like the over-reliance on Google and search rankings as sort of a success indicator, because it does show. I mean, you can definitely, I mean, we see this with large sites like HubSpot. I think John Henry just did like a whole tweet thread on this, really, really accurately describing why it's a rigged game. And big websites can essentially rank content that actually isn't that useful. You know, IBM ranks a piece of content on what is machine learning that's barely readable. And then you've got like a 10 domain rating site that writes the most beautiful piece ever written, and it's not going to see the light of day. So if you really care about building an audience, you can't really just solely rely on organic traffic as a success indicator that your program is fulfilling that need.
Right.
Yeah. You also can't be playing their game. You got to play a different game. But everyone's like, how do I do the same thing as HubSpot, or how do I grow organic traffic? My question's always like, why do you want to grow organic traffic?
Yeah, you start 15 years ago.
Yeah. So it brings to mind two things. One, as content marketers, and I don't want to speak to all content marketers, right? But there are a couple of things that you mentioned, especially with CXL. But we lose sight of this, and I know I lost sight of this when I was, working with the big companies, because you can rely on domain authority and whatever. You can write a 3-word blog post and it ranks because it's HubSpot or whatever. But talking to people, emailing people, hey, I think this might be useful. Hey, is this something you might be interested in? Right? Making those connections. I can't tell you, since I started the content studio, how many direct conversations I've never used LinkedIn the way I've ever used it before, where I'm sending out I'm finding people who do what I do and in that market, and saying like, hey, let's set up a half-hour conversation, an hour-long conversation. Let me buy you a cup of coffee, right? Go back to that Painpoint SEO. You're writing that thing and you're trying to think about the pain point as you're going through. No, it doesn't have a lot of search volume, but it's what, if we were in the SEO field and really only speaking SEO, that's the high intent stuff, right? You might get 10 visitors, but if all 10 visitors are like, yeah, this is great, I know more about this now than I ever did before, and everybody else is BSing this, or it's wrapped up in this other SEO keyword driven, like this is such a small part of some of these other pieces that create I mean, I don't even know what I'm saying right now, but it's this whole idea of like, yeah, if Google didn't exist, what would you do to get your content out there?
I love that mental model. It's also, I mean, it's just such a cliche to say it depends, but it's so context dependent, because there's many websites that we work with where SEO traffic truly is the best source of revenue, and therefore we goal ourselves on that. But for us, we actually tried to do the SEO driven content play early on with our agency. We found out we couldn't rank, we couldn't beat Ahrefs and Moz and HubSpot for these terms. And also, if we were to rank for these high traffic terms, who's going to buy a $10,000 a month service coming in the keyword, what is content marketing? Like, it's just not feasible. So we shifted to stuff like this, where it's, maybe 100 people listen to this, but the people that do are pretty high intent, and they get to learn who we are. They start to hear our voices in their ear and start to trust us more. And, through repeated exposure, maybe they listen to a couple podcasts, see a couple tweets, see a couple LinkedIn posts, meet up for coffee. That person becomes a lead and a client. And I think it's harder to measure that stuff. And maybe, I guess, I don't know if we totally have metrics for our program, but if we did, they would be completely different than the organic traffic, revenue from content metrics that we often goal ourselves on with clients.
Yeah. And to get a little meta, I mean, this is just a philosophy I've approached, which is ironic because I work in like growth and content marketing. Sometimes I think people focus too much on the measurable things and not enough on the non-measurable, intangible things. Like we created this podcast with a hypothesis that maybe you won't get 1 million downloads or listens, but if we can generate some sort of discussion, if we get a handful of people saying, hey, these podcasts are really interesting and like help me think through stuff, that's going to validate that this was worth it. And we're getting that. But how do you put that on a chart and show something going up and to the right? You can't, but it's still validation. And I wish there were more of that sort of approach to content, because then you can actually start creating stuff that's truly valuable and memorable.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really what it should be about. Animals, right? Arguably one of the best at this. Ryan has said in plenty of occasions, like, we purposefully don't do this. We need to get better at it, but we purposefully don't do it. But like, they're the name in content marketing when it comes to the agency. Like, And how did that even happen? Right. So I think that I hate to use the phrase thought leadership content, but that's what on the outside, that's what it would look like. And the idea is that when a sale is organic, right? When it's not even a question that you're buying from this particular place, that's because all of this other stuff is built up.
Yeah. I could end with a Nassim Taleb quote about this.
Go for it.
It's what is non-measurable and non-predictable will remain non-measurable and non-predictable. No matter how hard we try. I do think like there's a balance though. It's like we definitely want to aim towards something. It's like if your goal, well, like, all right, you're getting into fitness. It's like your goal is to gain weight, lose weight, whatever. And then maybe setting some sort of quant goal there. And then also qualitatively how you feel and like the timeline you get there is still important. So you can determine if you're going the right direction. So even though there's non-measurable, non-predictable stuff with regards to like, let's say our podcast, we could get a $20K a month client from this and we'd never be able to predict that. But we can measure the overall reach and maybe the sentiment, maybe the feedback that we get on it, maybe the comments we generate on a LinkedIn thread. So I think there's still things that we could chip away based on our strategic goals that we should still measure and also set stupidly high goals for and not worry about 10% month over month and how we're tracking on waterfall charts. I think that's maybe the approach that I like to take is like, let's measure what we can, what's directionally important and that we can't really game that easily. Keep an eye on that. And that's like kind of our path, our map, if you will, and then take the serendipity as it comes and realize that we can't predict all the metrics and the revenue and kind of the lagging stuff.
All right. Anything else?
It.
Any other thoughts on this topic? Maybe that we didn't touch on, or
do we have a whole nother hour?
No.
What are you talking about?
No.
I think we've done this topic justice. This is a closed book, Tommy.
This is, I love it.
Nobody should ever wonder about KPIs for content marketers again.
Well, to talk about the podcast just for a second, right? If you do get a $20,000 a month podcast, if you do get another $20,000 a month client out of that, would you ever know that it came from this podcast specifically?
Unless we ask.
Unless they said it on the sales calls, no.
Would they even know that it was this specific podcast?
That's a good point. Yeah, like maybe they listened to 6 of them and it's like,
Right.
hey, I listened to your podcast, and like maybe they say the last one they listened to, but maybe it was like 4 episodes ago. It's like that's the whole algorithmic attribution chain. It's like,
right.
Who knows how much value to give it a given touch point. We could also do a 2-hour-long conversation about how attribution modeling is by and large like pseudoscientific bullshit, but I won't go into that.
That's why I'm creating an algorithm. The software around
the algorithm will solve all the questions, answer all the questions.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, Tommy, you are the perfect person to have on for this topic. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us in all your delirium.
Good luck with the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, man.